He is, of course, our sports chaplain in South Africa. Bruce, welcome and hello to the show. Good to have you.
Hi, it's nice to be back. Good afternoon. And just before we get going, just hearty congratulations to Genevieve. That was a really inspiring interview. And we often celebrate the achievements of athletes, but we can't do this without officials and administrators. So huge congratulations on her being the first African to officiate in the table tennis at the Olympics. It's an incredible achievement.
And of course, we're talking about Chaplain's Corner, and it is when I get Mr. Bruce Nadin in of Sports Chaplains South Africa, and we speak about a perspective, a biblical perspective into sporting matters. And there's something that's weighing heavily on your heart in this regard, also in regards to the Olympics and a couple of African athletes as well. Let's hear your heart on this. Let's talk about equality. Let's talk about how some people groups sometimes are treated in regards to God's view of who they are, and sometimes even our own bias when it comes to these type of matters.
Yeah. I mean, I assume you're alluding to what's just happened to the two young Namibian athletes, the teenagers who have just smashed records at the under-20 championships, and that's Christine Mboma and Beatrice Masilingi. It's been discovered that they've got higher than prescribed testosterone levels for the 400, 800 and 1500 meter events. And the consequence of that is the World Athletics have withdrawn them on the eve of the Olympics from being able to compete at those events. And I think it's troubling on lots of levels, because they haven't been found guilty of taking performance enhancing drugs. My understanding is the statement from World Athletics is that their testosterone levels are they are naturally created, and there can be all sorts of reasons for that. And here we have two African female athletes who are being stopped from competing in their primary event. And the irony is they can compete at 100 and 200, because apparently you can have higher testosterone levels to compete in those events. And I think this has a lot to do with the Caster story. In dealing with the complex issues around Caster, they decided to make a measure. And there may be good scientific basis for this. There might be, but I'm not aware of it. And they prescribed 400, because of course an 800 meter athlete could go down to 400 and compete to a very high level. They could go up to 1500 and compete to a very high level. And of course they prescribed 400, 800 and 1500 based on her testosterone levels. At least that's what it looks like. And now we have these two young elite athletes from Namibia who have already excelled at the highest level. One of whom would most definitely be a medal contender, if not a gold medal contender at these Olympics, on the eve of it being withdrawn because of what looks a fairly arbitrary ruling. They were made female. They naturally produce these levels of testosterone, but they are banned from competing, or at least withdrawn from competing, unless they take particular medications to withdraw their testosterone levels. And that raises all sorts of questions as well. And I think, Marco, you talked about equality and people's own prejudices, whatever, but it does play into a long narrative, I think. You know, a historical narrative about Black excellence, you know, and African excellence actually being denied its place. Because all the athletes so far who have been forced to be withdrawn, I think bar one, are all female athletes from the African continent. Yeah, and that raises some really serious questions for me about who's making the decisions and why they are making those decisions.
And we're trying to look at this thing through a broader lens than just maybe our own opinions and being subjective to this thing, and rather being objective in this regard. But it smacks a little bit of the Caster Semenya scenario there as well, and also the fear of certain athletes dominating, maybe not just for this short space, but for a longer time. But there's something that you, in your encouragement yesterday, just a bit of a rant, but also in the encouragement, looking at how God sees people. And now we're bringing the biblical perspective into that before we get back maybe into more of the technical aspects of that. But as believers, how do we approach this type of thing when we look at somebody that's maybe a little bit different, or the makeup is a little bit different, which we don't understand? How do we deal with those? So those are souls, those are people that we're dealing with.
I think that's the crucial thing as a pastor who primarily expressed my ministry in the world of sport. My immediate default in this situation was, how does this make these two teenage young women who are transitioning into adulthood, who have discovered they are incredibly gifted to run fast at certain events and have trained really hard, to then have their femininity questioned, to have their ability to compete at their primary event denied to them? What does that do to their sense of identity? What does that do to them emotionally, psychologically, and even spiritually? And I think, this is where sports chaplaincy, I think, has a really vital role to play, Marco, because we want to come alongside athletes and be present in their world and be able to offer them pastoral and spiritual care. And I think that the first duty of the church, and as people like myself, is to be available so that athletes like this, in a situation like this, have got a safe place to go where they can feel loved and supported and have their identity as people made in the image of God affirmed and validated. And I think that's really important. And I'm glad to say that we do have someone in Namibia who works with Athletes in Action, who is looking to reach out to these two young women at what must be an incredibly challenging and painful moment in their lives. Can you imagine? You arrive on the world stage. In Christine's context, she's gone out and smashed the under-20 world record. Here's a glorious moment of celebration in your life, and in the aftermath of that, your testosterone levels disqualify you from competing further in that event. I think that's tragic.
It's not as if they've just appeared on the radar as of the other day. It's must have been a case of they've been tracked and looked at these performances and making other people wait, I believe, in terms of medals and achievements are a big thing for a lot of athletes. And when there's certain threats on the horizon as well, I'm pretty sure that plays a part in this decision making as well.
Yeah, maybe it does. I mean, there may well be, and I don't want to speculate on this, there may well be other interests that are distorting the response. But what I think I can observe with a degree of confidence, Marco, is that the majority of people who are making these decisions are white males, and I'm a white male, okay? And there's nothing wrong with being a white male, but the reality is most of the people who are making these decisions occupy a particular context and location. And if one of the things that God has blessed me with in coming to South Africa is being able to build relationships with people from a variety of backgrounds and a variety of cultures, and actually that's enriched my life and enabled me has opened up new perspectives in the way that a new understanding in the way I view my faith, know Jesus, and are able to celebrate life. And I just wonder if some of the people who are making the decisions, there's a lack of balance in the representation of the people in world athletics, on the Olympic committees. They haven't experienced life the way the majority of the world have experienced life. And the result of that is, even if it's not deliberate, they end up as a result of that, because they haven't got this other input and these other voices, end up making decisions that are prejudicial towards people from this continent. And that's not saying that they've necessarily intentionally, and maybe I'm being overgenerous, intentionally set out to do this, but because there isn't adequate broad representation of people from many backgrounds at these decision-making in these decision-making bodies, we end up with a scenario where other voices aren't being heard and other perspectives aren't being understood. And I think the consequence of that is these two young Namibians have been denied the dignity and right to be able to compete. And that's a gospel issue, because we serve a God of justice.
Yes.
We serve a God who in the book of Isaiah says, "Woe to you who make unjust laws, who oppress my people." We can't separate the gospel of salvation from the gospel of justice and liberation, because it's the one and same God who delivers both. Yeah, and I think this is a gospel issue. It is a kingdom issue, not just in terms of how we respond to these individual athletes in helping them navigate this, but also the bigger question about how we can live in a world where God's justice and where opportunity is fairly made available to as many people as possible. And I think that is a gospel, that is a kingdom issue.
What happens to us as believers in our silence? And obviously, you spoke about righteousness, and we are the righteousness of Christ. Yeah. And when we are silent, I think in our accusations, it's to say that, look, we're okay. We're okay with maybe even the injustice out there when we don't speak up.
Yeah, I mean, righteousness, we rightly talk about sort of relational righteousness in terms of being made right with God through Christ. There's moral righteousness, which comes about as a result of our sanctification. But when Scripture speaks of righteousness, it's also talking about social righteousness and of us living in a world where we must speak up for those who have we must speak out against those things where it looks like there's a very clear injustice. And I think this looks like one of those occasions. So, as a sports chaplaincy movement, we want to respond pastorally and to this situation. But equally, we want to say, hold on, there might be some more serious questions that need to be asked, because it does look like Black African athletes from this continent are being disadvantaged. And at the very least, we need to have that discussion.
Bruce, in terms of pastoral care, if these athletes were in your care, and I know obviously when we spoke in the past, you talk about hanging around with intent and building that relationship and speaking positively into the athletes that you deal with, what would you say to these two ladies if they were in your care at this moment?
I think it's less to do with what I would want to say, because I want to respond to how this is making them feel and the questions they might be asking, because I can't presume that I know what they are. And they're two separate individuals for whom this situation may well have impacted them differently. And so actually the first responsibility I've got in any situation as a pastor is to listen to someone, to listen to their hurt, their pain, their questions, their doubts, their fears, and to walk them then to a place of knowing the wholeness and healing of God in the midst of that. So my first responsibility as a sports chaplain has to always be to listen.
Sure. And I'm always enjoying my conversation with you. I'm going to give you just a couple of moments to spread some hope. And I think that's what we're all about. No matter what the situation looks like, how dire it is, we are the ones that's supposed to speak hope into situations because we have Christ in us. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about this situation, I hope what it does is elevate the debate. That actually World Athletics, the Olympic Committee and other sporting bodies would recognize that there are other voices and other perspectives that need to be addressed. And I think the hope for me is that as painful and as difficult as this situation is, that we we do have an opportunity here for a debate to take place. And I hope that's a healthy debate. You know,
Yeah.
I might have got things wrong here, and there might be things that I don't know and don't understand. And I also need to be willing to go on a journey. I think one of the things in our society that we're getting increasingly bad at doing is actually we shout over one another through social media instead of listening to one another. And so dialogue and debate has become toxic and unhealthy. So I hope that what happens as a result of this is there's an opportunity here for everyone to press the pause button and say, well, why is it that African athletes seem to be getting disproportionately disadvantaged by these rules? Is there something we don't yet understand, or is there something we don't yet see that might enable us to come to a position that actually is fair and just for everyone? So I hope that it leads to a healthy debate.
Sure. Bruce, always a pleasure to chat to you. I think we need to make more time as well. And we haven't had a Chaplain's Corner in a while. So I think let's continue in this vein where we speak into issues. Obviously, we speak sport, but there's other aspects to sport that we need to speak into, especially from the godly perspective. And that's why I love having you on the show in that regard. So looking forward to more conversation with you. But how do people get hold of you, Bruce?
Hey, well, that's really easy. They can go on our various social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Sports Chaplaincy South Africa with a call-up prayer book. Thank you, CCM, for helping sponsor that. We've now got 6,500 copies of the call-up prayer book in the hands of athletes across South Africa and some of the other Southern African countries. Just saw a Zambian footballer today posting as he's playing in the Kasafa Cup with his book. So thank you, CCFM, for helping sponsor that book. 6,500 already out in the hands of South African sports people. So yeah, can get hold of me, Bruce Nadin at gmail.com. That's BRUCENADIN at gmail.com. And those social media platforms, Facebook, you can see that behind Sports Chaplaincy South Africa. That's our website as well. So people can see that up there if they're watching on here, sportschaplaincy.org.za. So lots of ways in which people can get hold of me.
I love it. And I'm also glad to be able to catch up with you and finally see you. And we haven't had a session in studio, but this is probably the next best thing to do. So people can go and view this on YouTube and Facebook if they want to do so afterwards as well. But
yeah, I know what you're going to say. I've got a good face. I've got a good face for radio. Okay?
But my co-host say that you must go brush your hair. I don't know. After that, you guys can sort that. Nothing wrong. I don't see it. But listen, always great to connect with you. God bless you.
And you. God bless, my friend. Take care.
Cheers, Bruce. Till next time. Bye-bye. So that was Bruce Nadin of Sports Chaplaincy South Africa. And we're about to say goodbye. Can you believe it?